Hello and welcome to this episode of Voices to End Hunger. I'm your host, Minerva Delgado. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP, is the largest food assistance program in the U.S., helping approximately 42 million people across the country. At just over $6 per person per day, SNAP provides a modest grocery benefit that can be a lifeline for countless individuals and families working to make ends meet. SNAP is no stranger to attacks, nor are those who rely on food assistance and other federal programs. Charges of waste, fraud, and abuse have plagued the program for years, despite the fact that the vast majority of beneficiaries who can work do work. And 80% of households that participate in SNAP include a child, a senior, or a person with disabilities. Further, nearly two-thirds of SNAP benefits go to families with children. On this special episode of Voices to End Hunger, I speak with three individuals with lived experience and expertise with SNAP. They are Barbie Izquierdo, Dawn Pierce, and Yolanda Gordon, all members of the Alliance's Hunger Free Communities Advisory Council. And we discuss what policymakers and everyday people need to understand about this critical program and the lives affected by it. Barbie, Dawn, Yolanda, thank you for joining us today and for your willingness to share your stories. Why don't we start with introductions and we'll go in alphabetical order. Barbie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. My name is Barbie Izquierdo. I am a national anti-hunger advocate, a proud Afro-Latina, mother of two incredible kids, Leilani and Aiden. I was born and raised in North Philadelphia, and I now live in Florida. I would say my journey has been shaped by both struggle and resilience. I'm somebody with firsthand lived experience of food insecurity and of poverty. But I would say I still found a way to raise my voice and fight for justice. Today, I am currently the director of Neighbors Community Engagement at Feeding America, where I work to ensure that people with lived experience aren't just included in advocacy, but that they're centered as leaders in shaping policy and system change.
Wonderful, thank you. Dawn, would you introduce yourself?
My name is Dawn Pierce. I live in Boise, Idaho. I am the National Director of Organizing and Community Empowerment with Hunger Free America. I also have lived experience and I now have turned that into a lived expertise. My husband Daniel and I live on a half acre with our three dogs, two cats, and 11 chickens. Um, and hunger and poverty aren't theoretical for me. They've been my reality. And I just love educating people on what that means.
Thank you, Dawn. And Yolanda, would you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Yolanda Gordon, and I was born and raised in South Carolina and still currently live in the great state of South Carolina. I am a U.S. Army veteran, and I also I'm the mother of three children. Two of my children are on the autism spectrum, and I do have firsthand experience with safety net programs and also with implementation of safety net programs. And I have been doing this work now for over 15 years. And I feel like that in the richest country in the world, one person hungry is one person too many.
Thank you, Yolanda. And thank you for your service. So, we're gathering to talk about SNAP primarily. And there's a lot of negative rhetoric right now floating in DC around SNAP and proposals to cut billions of dollars out of the program. And so, we wanted to talk to people who have some real life experience, who understand what this program is, how it's affected, all of you, and talk a little bit about, your experiences. So I'd love to start with the question of when was the first time you realized that either SNAP or another assistance program was something that you were going to need uh, help you make ends meet?
So I realized I needed help not long after I was laid off from my job with a bankruptcy attorney on January 11th of 2010. And it wasn't just about losing my paycheck. It was the slow sinking recognition that I couldn't make ends meet on my own anymore. And I couldn't feed my son and take care of my son in a way that he'd become accustomed to anymore. I remember borrowing ingredients from my mom so my son could bring something to a school event, calling in sick to work because I didn't have anything to contribute to a potluck. But the moment hit me the hardest was one night I went to bed hungry so my son could have dinner. And that's when I knew I couldn't do this alone and I needed SNAP and I needed some help. And that was one of the hardest things I have ever had to admit to myself.
Thank you for sharing that. Yolanda, what was your experience?
So I had two different experiences. Once, when my ex husband and I got married, we were both in the US Army. And when we moved into base housing, we lost our additional housing allowance, which was around $500 a month a piece. So that was $1,000 gone out of our budget. At the time when I broke down both of our pay, it was minimum wage to be in the US Army, which I don't think has changed very much since. Um, and of course, we had just gotten married, starting a family, and we just knew that we needed assistance to feed ourselves because, of course, we were in a location, we had to have a car insurance, phone, the essentials to make sure that we were covered. And then, the second time was when I was going through a divorce and my children were diagnosed with autism, and I could not find a daycare that could take care of them, for me to work full time, and I had to work part time. Um, that sinking feeling of having to apply for benefits, happened pretty quickly. And once the reality set in, it was comforting knowing I could at least feed them, but it was still the reality of the stigma of having to rely on the system to provide for them.
Thank you for talking a little bit about that stigma because I think that still is something that keeps people away many times from these programs that can help them if they choose to take advantage of it. Once you decided, yes, that I need some assistance, I'm going to go apply for SNAP. Talk a little bit about what that experience was like.
So, when I applied for my ex-husband and I in Virginia, it was just a common thing, being in the military that we applied. So it wasn't even uncommon. No one would bat an eye. Like we weren't the only people standing in the room, wearing fatigues, um, applying for benefits. But during my divorce and being a single mom, the experiences varied from I know you have a man living in your house helping pay your bills to do you really need these benefits? Can't you work full time? So it was a lot of negativity and a lot of rhetoric and a lot of mischaracterization and basically the old tropes about Black women that needed assistance that would pop up in interviews and having to have those tough conversations and let people know that no, I don't. If I had a man living in my home paying my bills, I wouldn't be here. If I could work full time, that's where I would be. This is not something that I would want for myself. So I can say that my experiences were not positive trying to access benefits, and it leaves a mark. It reminds you of who people really are when you're talking about survival.
Thank you. I'm sorry you had to go through those judgments. Also, it is shocking to hear that so many military families have to take advantage of SNAP because the pay is so low. I don't think that that's something that most people are aware of. So thank you for bringing that up. Um, Dawn, did you want to talk a little bit about your experience when you applied?
Absolutely, I can. So, my experience applying for SNAP was a mix of gratitude, humiliation, and just sheer survival. I was grateful because it meant I could feed my son, but that gratitude was tangled up with the shame. Walking into the Department of Health and Welfare, I felt every ounce of pride I have being weighed against my desperation. Um, the application process feels invasive. I had to explain every single detail of my life down to the last penny. I had to prove I was poor enough to qualify. And while I understood the need for accountability, it felt like I was being judged and not helped. Once I was approved, SNAP absolutely helped, but it didn't solve everything. It was never enough for us to get through a full month. I became an expert at food math, um, is what I called it myself, but stretching every bit of SNAP dollars as far as it could go. And when it ran out, I went without so my son didn't have to. Emotionally, it's draining. You carry this constant fear with you of never having enough. What if you're going to run out? What if you didn't plan accordingly? And that's food math. And then this quiet hunger paired with the louder shame of needing help in the first place. But you keep showing up because that's what moms do. We survive for our kids, and even if it breaks us a little bit, it's just what we do.
I so appreciate you sharing that. I think that unfortunately, your experience, is one that's shared by others who feel that sense of judgment
Yeah,
and are made to feel ashamed when the truth is you need a little help. And this is a program that sounds like did help you at the right time. So, how would your life be different if you hadn't had SNAP or other assistance programs to rely on to be available to you at that time?
yeah. So if SNAP hadn't been available to me, I honestly don't know how we would have made it. And I think about that, like, where would I be today if I hadn't have had that lifeline? And it wasn't just food, it was the difference between surviving and slipping into complete crisis. Without SNAP, I would have had to make impossible choices instead of just the hard choices. Skipping meals even more often, maybe pawning or like going to the pawn shop um, with whatever we had left for money, for food, maybe even facing homelessness. And I was already walking a razor's edge, and SNAP kind of helped keep me from falling off. I wouldn't say completely, I would say tightrope teetering from falling off. Um, and more than that, it gave me a thread of stability during a time when everything else was unraveling in my life. It gave me just enough breathing room to focus on getting back on my feet to where we needed to be.
I love your analogy of a tightrope because I don't know if most people know the average benefit today is about $6.20 per person per day. Probably when you were on it, it was closer to 550, Dawn, or maybe even less. And so while the way people talk about SNAP and the importance of cutting back makes it seem as if people are living high on the hog, on SNAP benefits. I think what you're describing is the reality. And as you said, for most people, the benefits don't last more than 2 weeks. And so I think it's important for folks to understand while that isn't a generous benefit, it's a modest benefit, but it does allow you to have that leg up, that foothold. I love the way you describe that. Barbie, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with SNAP and how it's helped you and your family?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Minerva. My experience with SNAP was documented in the in the documentary, A Place at the Table, where you get to see how I struggle to feed myself and my children, but also my journey into advocacy. And exactly what you just said, the first 2 weeks of the month, my children were able to, choose what type of fruit they wanted that day. But as the days went by and it got closer to the end of the month, and there is no more stretching of these dollars, it became more so what am I going to do? I think that, as Dawn said, SNAP is definitely a lifeline. I remember it being one of those things that was stable in my household. I remember when SNAP was delivered by food stamps and we had to rip them off the little books. Like I remember asking my mom if I can have some food stamps to go to the store and the lady telling me, "Well, you can buy this, but you can't buy that." And then growing into an adult, becoming a mother and having to face these same challenges with the EBT card. But it was still something that was stable. I knew what the program was. I knew where to go. I knew how to apply. I just didn't know, as Dawn mentioned, what it felt like to apply and go through these programs, the stigma that we face. I would also point out, although I would say the stigma of being on SNAP definitely had a negative effect on my self worth, what I would say is that SNAP has always been a way of bringing my community together. When I didn't know where to go or where the county assistance office was, my neighbors were the one who pointed me where to go to. They community always had a way of bringing the resources together, and SNAP was the filler to actually bring the food into the household. So as grueling as the authorization process, the application processes are, I think for myself, there were four pillars of programs that, as Dawn mentioned, I wouldn't be here today and be the person that I am if I didn't have these four programs, which were SNAP, WIC, the Child Income Tax Credit, and TCIS, which was what paid for my daycare when I was in living in Pennsylvania. It's like if I didn't have these four resources that allowed me to be able to work, to be able to provide for my family, but still have the supplemental assistance that I needed, it definitely helped us. And I hope that people can see the value of the program because as we talk about SNAP outcomes, we need to look at people like, Dawn, like myself, like Yolanda, who have turned these experiences into this expertise that can not only influence, policy change, but it can also change systems within itself. So,
Thank you, Barbie. And I think that you are transitioning us really well to the next question I want to talk about. You are all now fairly active in the advocacy realm. You're all experts in your own rights, and you all are doing really wonderful programmatic work as well as policy work. As you speak to policymakers, what are one or two things that you think a typical policymaker misunderstands about SNAP and the people who use the programs? Yolanda, do you want to go first?
Number one, they think that people who use the program are lazy, that they don't want to work for themselves, they don't want to do things for themselves. Um, in recent meetings that I've had with some of my offices, they think that all people buy is processed foods. And I'm one of those people. I'm in the South, so I learned how to cook at a very young age. It's a lot cheaper to prepare a meal than to buy something processed, unless your SNAP doesn't stretch that far and you're just trying to get calories. And explaining to them, as a medical professional, why people make those choices, because it's a lot easier to get empty calories to fill themselves than it is to try to make $79 for a family of four stretch for an entire month. One of the other things that I think is a common misconception is that individuals who use SNAP, they're not a return on investment. And I have to remind them, if it wasn't for SNAP, I would not have 2 degrees. Like, I would not have been able to go to school and as they like to say back in the early 2010s, retool myself so that I could get gainful employment and be able to take care of my kids. So it's that reminder that there are so many of us who are the return on investment that you don't talk about that exist in America because their support was there. We were able to do the things that we needed to do because SNAP was there to help us feed ourselves and our families. Not everybody who is on SNAP is lazy, and the mass majority of people who are on SNAP work. So it's, those misconceptions, and also that work requirements do not work. It doesn't make anyone get a job any faster than they would if they didn't have SNAP. So, just those common misconceptions about the behavior of people and how people are perceived because they have a need.
Thank you. I'd love to reflect back on two things you said. One, the whole idea of investment. So there have been studies for years that show that SNAP reduces poverty, reduces food insecurity, but that it makes adults more productive, that it helps children do better in school, and that it also improves health for children. And it actually is a healthcare savings program, if you will. So those are important things to highlight. Also, you mentioned work requirements. There are all sorts of proposals to increase the age of work requirements. SNAP already has very stringent work requirements, and I think most people don't understand that. But as you point out, the work requirements are not such that they're really helping people get better jobs, increase their incomes. That has been studied and proven. And so while work requirements really sound very sexy, for people who are thinking, oh, those lazy people need to get back to work, thank you for pointing out that most of the people on SNAP who can work are working. And that's a reality that I think, people need to understand better as well. Dawn, do you want to talk a little bit about when you speak to policymakers, what you think are some of those misunderstandings that need to be corrected?
Absolutely. So policymakers often misunderstand the program itself. They assume, as Yolanda said, that everyone on SNAP is trying to game the system. We're just looking for a handout. We're just looking to commit fraud. And that's truly not the case. I know in Idaho, they're blaming, SNAP recipients for the obesity epidemic, thinking that we only buy junk like candy and soda. And they also think that we're getting rich off of it, which is not true. They forget that most of us are working multiple jobs to survive. And I'm not quite sure how many jobs somebody's needs to have in order to satisfy a policymaker. And they're all about personal responsibility. And actually applying for SNAP and receiving SNAP is being personally responsible. You're providing for your family with a tried and true program that absolutely works as it was intended to. They don't understand the emotional toll of relying on the programs. It's not just about food, it's about dignity. And people on SNAP, they don't realize, and they often think that they're there by choice, but they're there because the system has failed them, whether through job loss, illness, financial hardship, a death in the family. And the help they offer doesn't cover enough to live. It doesn't. It falls very short. SNAP often forces families to make impossible choices, and they don't see what those choices are. It doesn't seem to matter that you're a real human being with a real life, with people that rely on you, and the decisions they're making are affecting you. They don't see that. They just see numbers and a budget. And they don't know what it's like to buy healthy food or buy something that's just cheaper and easier. And they think that when we go to the store, that people who rely on SNAP are too uneducated to make the right food choices. They think that we're too dumb to figure it out, when actually It's a lack of accessibility due to high cost of healthy, good food.
Thanks, Dawn. Thank you for humanizing that experience for us and those impossible choices that you're all forced to make in terms of being able to provide for your families. Barbie, did you want to share anything about this question? What you think policymakers misunderstand and what they need to understand better?
Absolutely. Another big misconception is that programs like SNAP create dependence, as if the moment someone receives help, they'll stop trying to improve their situation. But that's not what I've seen, and it's certainly not what I've lived. What these programs usually provide is, like Dawn said, some breathing room. When you're constantly in survival mode, deciding whether to pay a light bill or buy groceries, there's no room to think about your long term goals and let alone step towards them. SNAP doesn't take away from someone's drive, it gives them a moment to breathe, to be able to feed their kids without panic so that they can focus on work, school, or just making it to the next day. For me, it was never about wanting a handout. And I think that that's another misconception, is that everyone on SNAP is just looking for a handout. I think that what people are looking for are bridges, a temporary support from one place to another. And because I had that support, I was able to stabilize my life and grow into leadership and now advocate for others. And that is not dependence, that is resilience being made possible.
Thank you, Barbie. We're all giving you snaps. Um, creating that bridge, right, to support you while you become more independent. And that's a beautiful analogy, I think, to use for snap. Thank you for that. So, as I'm sure our audience is learning, you are all expert advocates, and would love to get your ideas about what do you think are the best strategies to get through to policymakers with some of these suggestions that you all have. Yolanda, why don't we start with you?
So the first thing, and I didn't mention at the top of this, I currently work for Results, and I'm the senior manager of the Results Fellowship, and I train emerging leaders to advocate and talk to policymakers. And I remind them that one conversation is not going to get the message across, that you have to be persistent. One analogy that I use is that the Grand Canyon was not created in a brief moment. Like, it was created over time. And you have to work and be persistent and build those relationships and move them from being detractors to champions and help them understand the importance of the need for programs like SNAP. But the other thing is to build a relationship with that office and to keep working on that relationship. Even if it's to send an email and say, hey, was just thinking about you guys, wanted to see if, you wanted to ask me any questions or how can I be a resource? Because you're continuing that relationship, you're going to be memorable to them. And you are also going to be the person that they know you're going to come and see them and talk to them about what's important. And if you don't tell them what is important, they don't know. They see facts, figures, numbers all the time, but when they have a real person in front of them telling them what matters, why it matters, they're going to remember that a lot more than you walking into their office and giving them more facts and figures. So, sharing experiences and making sure that they understand the impact on whatever they have planned and humanizing it, and also reminding them of their moral duty to protect American citizens.
Dawn, do you want to jump in here?
The best way to reach policymakers is to make your voice personal and impossible to ignore. Don't just send an email or make a phone call. Share your story. When you speak from the heart about how policies impact you and your community, it forces them to see the human side of things, like Yolanda said. Don't be afraid to be direct, but polite. Share your struggles, your triumphs, and let them know the consequences of their decisions. Give them a human face to go along with that number and that in that budget line item that they want to get rid of. Another effective way would be to build a coalition. Find others who share your experience and amplify your messages together. The more voices they hear, the harder it is to ignore them. There was an old shampoo commercial, and it went, and I told one friend, and she told another friend, and so on and so on and so on. I mean, that's from a long time ago, but that's how I think of coalition building. Organizing rallies, town halls, meeting with local officials also works. You have to be consistent because change rarely comes from one conversation, and remind them that you're paying attention. One thing I've learned over the years is the power of relationships. Yolanda also mentioned building a relationship with your member of Congress's office. Reach out regularly, even when it feels like nothing is changing. I've been visiting with one of my senators for the past 12 years. And at an event I attended last month, he was there. And he remembered me as the food and hunger lady. And I counted that as a huge win. Does remember my name, that's fine. I'm the food and hunger lady. And that's exactly how I think I want to be known. And that's the kind of recognition you get when you consistently show up and make your issues known. Repeat yourself over and over and over. If they don't listen the first time, repeat yourself over and over and over. Keep pushing. And eventually they'll hear you. Sometimes it's to make you be quiet, but you will get heard at some point.
Barbie, what do you think?
I think that both my colleagues have said everything that needs to be said. I would just, if I would say it in my own words, I would just say real stories that when we bring them in and pair them with data, it's powerful. So we have to make sure that when we're speaking to lawmakers, policymakers, that we're not trying to guilt them, but more so that we're trying to build a connection with them through our stories and through the data that we're giving them so that they can make better informed decisions.
And Barbie, thank you for mentioning that. Talk a little bit more about stories. I know that sometimes advocates who are professionals in the fields get excited about sharing other people's stories, but what is the appropriate way to really get these stories in front of policymakers?
Absolutely. I think the right way to get these stories in front of policymakers is to give the person telling the story the opportunity to go and tell them themselves. If they don't feel comfortable, supply them with resources and support so that they can learn and get to the point where they feel comfortable. Provide them with the tools that they need to be able to articulate what they need to say and not just be able to share their story through emotions, but with an effective ask at the end so that the lawmaker doesn't get lost in the facts of the story, but that they know, okay, I have this information now, this is what I'm going to do with that information. I think for too long, we've seen a lot of story banking, of holding of stories that people share their most vulnerable moments, and not centering the people who are living through these experiences. I think, as I said, allowing us to utilize our own skills and bring ourselves forward not only shows that the stigmas that we face against SNAP, saying that we're lazy, that we're uneducated, that we don't want to get off the program. Our work shows that all of these things are false. And as long as we're creating these opportunities so that more people can see what lived experience is, and that this fight isn't fun. It's I've said this before, it's psychological warfare when you're sitting there doing that mental math and trying not to lose your mind as a mother and as a person, as a provider. Um, so being able to convey these stories with such weight, but still be able to have that again, that ask that says, yes, we understand that the story was unfortunate, but this is what we can do about it today so that others don't have to go through it. So let's provide more opportunities for people to share their own stories, to go before Congress and testify on their own with the support that they need.
Thank you, Barbie. More snaps coming in your direction. I think I do want to share, particularly to my fellow advocates out there. Um, who are working as professional advocates, professional lobbyists. Many times, we're looking for stories because we want to humanize the statistics, but we don't take the time to build the trust. And one thing, we all have worked together for years through the Alliance to End Hunger's Hunger Free Communities Advisory Council. You're all advisors at the Alliance, and we've built trust. And I, personally really appreciate the fact that you all are willing to share your stories and be vulnerable. But we know that it isn't easy, and that when we're asking someone who's on SNAP to talk about why they're on SNAP, how SNAP benefits them, or how they're using it, or what it means if we take it away, I just want to remind us all that we need to be incredibly respectful and humble. Because it is a learning moment for those of us who are the professionals in the field. So thank you all for being so vulnerable and sharing your stories. It really does make a big difference in terms of helping policymakers understand who's on SNAP, why they use SNAP, and why it's so important. And I hope people walk away with an understanding of that. But I would love to end and wrap up with any final thoughts. And we'll go with Yolanda first.
I want to say to advocates out there who are feeling discouraged in this current environment, you're not alone. When I first started in this type of work, I felt very alone and very isolated until I found my tribe. There are other people out there who understand what you're going through, but also when you're talking to policymakers, don't always feel like you're preaching to the choir, because both sides of the aisle need to hear the same message. They need to understand what's at stake, because we want both of them to work together for what's best for all of us. But we also have to remember that we don't want folks to slip through the cracks thinking that, oh, this amendment is not that important. Like, make sure that you speak to every policymaker about what is important, and just don't give up when it gets tough. Take some time for yourself. Self-care is a revolutionary act, and make sure that you breathe and, continue to do what you do, because you're amazing and someone is watching you, and they're taking strength from you, and eventually they're going to step up with you. So just keep going.
Thanks, Yolanda. I know you give me strength. Just listening to you lifts me up, makes my day. Certainly appreciate you. Dawn, final thoughts?
What I hope advocates remember as they fight for SNAP or any other, important safety net program, that it's not just a program. It's a lifeline for so many people, and it's very personal. It's easy to get caught up in policy debates and numbers and statistics, but behind all those numbers and statistics are real families with real struggles, and they have real lives. They have, moms who are sick, dads who, got to hurt their finger mowing the grass. We're real people. And we have to remind ourselves that hunger doesn't discriminate. It impacts people of all backgrounds and all walks of life. Advocates, I would hope they remember that change doesn't come overnight. It takes persistence, grit, patience, sometimes a lot of prayer, sometimes a lot of sending good juju out into the universe. And sometimes you just have to say, again, the same thing over and over and repeat your message in new ways to make sure it lands where you need it to land. Keep pushing. Don't get discouraged. Every conversation, every letter, every story shared is another step towards progress. I would also tell them that you can't share another person's story in a way that you try to make it your own. You can certainly share about somebody that you know who was on SNAP and this happened, but you can't share that story as if it's yours to tell. And always, if you are going to mention someone's story, get permission. Finally, I hope advocates never forget that SNAP is not just about food. It's about dignity. It's about giving people a chance to take care of themselves. It's about giving people a chance to take care of their families, hopefully without shame, because they're being accountable. The fight for SNAP is a fight for respect and the basic right to live with dignity.
Thanks, Dawn. Thank you for being a super advocate and for so humanizing this issue for us. We appreciate you so much. Barbie, final thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I would say I have a two-part final thought. The first one would be, I know I didn't share much about my personal story today. One, because I feel like it's been shared in many different places already. So I wanted to come in here and just share my thoughts and not more so too much of who I am. But if any of our listeners are interested in learning more about my personal struggles with food insecurity and what it felt like or what it was like to navigate the mind of someone who's food insecure, please visit my Etsy shop. I have two books, two ebooks, one food insecurity to hope, and the other one is Empowered and Afro Latina's Journey to Resilience and Triumph. They both talk about my experiences with food insecurity and what it's like to try to become a leader in this space while navigating all of these challenges. But my second final thought would be, at the end of the day, this work isn't just about policy; it's about people. It's about mothers and families trying to make impossible choices, kids who deserve to grow up without hunger, and communities who carry more strength than they're ever given credit for. I share my story not for sympathy, but for change, because I believe that when we lead with compassion, when we listen to lived experience, and when we design systems that reflect real life and not assumptions, we build a future where dignity isn't earned, it's honored. So, whether you're a policymaker, an advocate, or a listener, I hope you walk away remembering that no one should have to prove that they're worthy of a meal. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbie. Thank you for your leadership and your unique voice in this space. You're such a wonderful advocate, and we so appreciate you. A huge thank you to Barbie Izquierdo, Dawn Pierce, and Yolanda Gordon for their time and insights today. I'm Minerva Delgado. Our producer is Nate McGrath. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at podcast@alliancetoendhunger.org. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day.